The California housing marketplace just experienced an earthquake that nobody saw coming. And what's unfolding right now will determine whether you ever own property in this state, how much you'll sacrifice in rent, and whether your home becomes your pathway to wealth or your financial prison. Mortgage accessibility just expanded in ways that could ignite another frenzy, or detonate a catastrophe worse than 2008. A mass migration of individual property owners, while tech-backed corporate entities silently purchase entire neighborhoods before anyone realizes what's happening. Legislative changes being drafted in Sacramento that could crush millions of homeowners. And a supply tsunami that's creating outcomes nobody predicted. If you own, rent, or dream of buying in California, these forces are rewriting your financial future this very moment. This isn't another market cycle. This is complete systemic restructuring. And once you grasp what's genuinely occurring, you'll never view California real estate the same way again. Let me expose exactly what's transformed and why it impacts you more than you realize. Write in the comments, California Property Truth, if you're ready to know what's really happening behind the headlines. We'll start with the revelation that's been hiding in plain sight. Federal mortgage regulators released updated guidance last spring that slipped completely under mainstream radar. But it's already reshaping who can acquire property in California and who gets permanently locked out. Ever since the 2008 collapse, every single mortgage application has been put through extreme stress scenarios. Lenders don't just confirm you can handle current payments. They test whether you'd survive if interest rates suddenly exploded by 3 or 4 full percentage points. The logic seemed reasonable after the financial meltdown. Shield borrowers from overextending dangerously. Protect the banking system from imploding again. But here's where things get absolutely fascinating. We're currently experiencing falling rates in 2025, yet lenders have been stress testing applications as if rates were about to skyrocket upward catastrophically. They've been using worst-case reversion rates, those punitive rates you get slammed with when your fixed term expires, and then layering additional safety margins on top of that. In real-world terms, this mechanism locked out tens of thousands of perfectly capable California buyers, individuals who could easily afford their mortgage at prevailing market rates, couldn't pass these doomsday simulation tests. Federal authorities finally stepped in and told lenders they possessed far more discretion than they were utilizing, testing based on reasonable 5-year outlooks, not catastrophic nightmare scenarios. If rates are declining, your stress models need to reflect actual reality. They also reminded financial institutions about consumer fairness obligations. Translation: stop creating lending standards that artificially exclude people who can legitimately afford to borrow. This represents significant easing of restrictions. It's not as radical as eliminating stress testing entirely, but it's an unmistakable signal from regulators. More loan approvals, more marketplace transactions, more economic activity flowing. Stay locked in because what I'm about to reveal next will show you exactly how Silicon Valley money is manipulating these lending changes for maximum profit. Then summer brought an even more dramatic shift. Federal banking authorities overhauled the entire mortgage regulatory structure, eliminated outdated bureaucratic obstacles, and made it dramatically easier for Californians to switch lenders and restructure their borrowing arrangements. Refinancing became substantially streamlined. You can now pay down mortgages faster without suffocating under paperwork mountains. You can explore preliminary options with lenders without triggering comprehensive regulatory consultation processes every single interaction. The system is loosening up, and it's accelerating rapidly. Beyond this, the debt-to-income limitation rules transformed. From summer onwards, only lenders originating over $250 million annually must comply with stringent rules limiting high debt-to-income mortgages to specific percentages of total lending volume. Smaller specialized lenders received exemptions. What does this mean in practical California terms? More lenders can now extend 7 or even 8 times your annual salary instead of the conventional 4 times earnings cap. Plus, renewed state-backed mortgage guarantee programs are helping lenders approve buyers with minimal down payments, sometimes as low as 3%. So here's the question every Californian should be screaming about, but nobody is. Is this genuinely about making homeownership accessible? Or is this about artificially inflating property valuations to prevent a market collapse? Because when you make credit easier to obtain, you don't automatically improve affordability. You inject demand into the system. And when supply stays constrained across California's coast, that demand doesn't reduce prices. It launches them back into the stratosphere. State and federal authorities desperately need growth, need transaction volume, need money flowing through the economy. But expansion fueled by loosened credit standards has a documented history of ending in absolute disaster. We've seen this catastrophe play out before, haven't we? Which leads us straight into the next force colliding with everything else. Zillow and Realtor.com are both documenting the highest inventory levels for sale in over 12 years. Listings surged 14% year over year, which initially sounds like incredible news for potential buyers. More selection, more seller competition, superior negotiating leverage. Except there's a devastating problem. Buyer demand only climbed 6%. That disparity is monumentally significant. Sellers are now desperately chasing buyers instead of the reverse, manufacturing a completely different market psychology. Then the pandemic buying hysteria. Don't you dare click away, because what comes next exposes why tens of thousands of California families are being forced to liquidate their homes right now. Market analysts predict California property appreciation will decelerate to between 0.5 and 1.8% for 2025. When you account for inflation running above 3%, that's devastating real value erosion. Some regions might experience marginal appreciation, others outright declines. But the comprehensive picture is value destruction. So why are masses of people suddenly flooding listings onto the market? It's not because market dynamics look promising. It's because they have absolutely zero alternatives remaining. Remember all those purchasers who secured absurdly cheap mortgage deals during 2020 and 2021? Rates were hovering around 2.6%, sometimes even lower across California. Those fixed-rate periods are terminating right now, and homeowners are facing horrifying reality. Their monthly obligations are exploding 35, 45, sometimes 60% higher. Tens of thousands of California households simply cannot afford refinancing at prevailing rates, even with the relaxed lending standards we just examined, so they're liquidating instead. This isn't a gradual trickle. This is a financial tsunami, and it's barely beginning. Real estate professionals throughout California are observing identical patterns: desperate sellers, reality-based pricing, dramatically extended market time. Properties that received multiple offers within 48 hours during the pandemic now languish for months without acceptable bids. Buyers possess more negotiating power than they've experienced in a decade, but only if they can actually qualify for mortgage approval, and stomach dramatically higher rates. The inventory explosion should theoretically benefit buyers, but it's symptomatic of widespread financial trauma, not healthy market correction. And here's what makes this truly sinister. Sacramento understands this perfectly. That's precisely why authorities are so aggressive about loosening lending criteria, enabling people to borrow larger sums, injecting additional buyers into an oversupplied market. Because if they don't act, if demand remains suppressed while inventory continues flooding in, valuations don't merely stagnate, they crater. And collapsing California property values terrify policymakers more than virtually any economic scenario. Property wealth finances. California's entire economy backs pension funds, underpins consumer confidence, collateralizes business loans. A housing crash doesn't just devastate individual homeowners, it threatens California's complete financial infrastructure. Keep your eyes glued here because what I'm about to expose next reveals which California landlords actually protect tenants and which ones benefit from current regulations. But while ordinary sellers struggle and compete desperately, an entirely different category is executing calculated strategic moves. California's dramatically expanded tenant protection laws and escalating property tax burdens are ejecting individual landlords from the marketplace at catastrophic velocity. Superficially, that sounds phenomenal. Fewer landlords competing for properties theoretically means reduced competition for first-time purchasers. Correct? Except reality is infinitely more complicated. Immediate term, available rental inventory is evaporating, which means rents are accelerating upward even faster. Longer term, the landlords abandoning California aren't the ones tenants should want disappearing. Recent comprehensive studies analyzing California landlord operational patterns, objective statistical research examining how different landlord categories actually function, uncovered findings that deeply contradict popular narratives. Large landlords, those controlling 5 or more properties, demonstrate double the eviction rates compared to small operators. They're substantially more aggressive about maximizing rent between tenancies or during renewal periods. 79% of large California landlords increased rent for incoming tenants. 67% raised rates for renewals. They calculate rent adjustments based exclusively on algorithmic market optimization, zero emotional consideration, zero individual flexibility. Small landlords, those managing just 1 or 2 California properties, demonstrate significantly higher likelihood of maintaining stable rents, particularly for established long-term tenants. They're frequently personally invested, demonstrate flexibility, show willingness to work with tenants experiencing temporary financial difficulties. And according to documented research data, these smaller operators are the precise ones planning mass exodus, intensifying regulation, eliminated tax benefits, uncertainty surrounding expanding rent control. Those dominate their reasons for departing. Who's expanding operations? The institutional giants, those controlling 5, 10, 100,000 properties. The operators statistically proven more likely to initiate evictions, more aggressive about maximizing rent extraction, more inclined to treat tenants as algorithmic data points rather than human beings. So while stated policy objectives claim tenant protection, actual measurable outcomes are systematically removing statistically superior landlords, while retaining operators tenants most frequently experience conflicts with. This identical consolidation pattern is devastating every California industry. Independent bookstores obliterated by Amazon, family-owned restaurants displaced by venture-backed chains, taxi drivers destroyed by app-based monopolies. Not because massive players deliver superior service, but because they can absorb regulatory compliance expenses at massive scale, navigate legal complexity through dedicated departments, optimize operations through algorithmic systems. What disappears? Personal relationships, individual flexibility, community accountability. That's precisely what's vanishing from California rental housing right now. Stay locked in, because what comes next exposes the tech billionaires and corporations buying entire California cities before properties hit public markets. This legislative framework will dramatically worsen wealth concentration, not address California's housing emergency. It's consolidating rental property into progressively fewer, exponentially wealthier hands. Tech-funded corporations, institutional investment vehicles, and massive portfolio operators are aggressively expanding, while ordinary Californians get systematically eliminated, which delivers us to the most alarming development of all. We're no longer competing merely with traditional landlords or modest investors. We're competing against Blackstone, KKR, Brookfield, Invitation Homes, and Silicon Valley-backed property tech companies. These aren't organizations experimenting with real estate as diversification. They control hundreds of thousands of California homes, not random scattered acquisitions, complete planned communities, entire subdivisions purchased directly from developers before public market access. Some have acquired ownership stakes in lumber mills and concrete suppliers. Absorb that reality for a moment. They're not simply purchasing finished homes. They're vertically integrating the entire supply chain, controlling the fundamental materials California housing gets constructed from. That demonstrates their confidence level that dominating this market generates generational wealth. Additional massive institutional players are acquiring undeveloped land banks, zoning entitlements, water rights, anything controlling future development capacity. Why this aggressive expansion? Because California housing has transformed into one of the most reliable, inflation-protected investments globally. Rising inflation automatically drives rents higher. Mortgage debt remains fixed or deflates in real value terms. People require housing regardless of economic catastrophe. Even when everything else collapses, Californians pay rent. They must. It's not negotiable. These corporations comprehend something fundamental that ordinary individuals completely miss. California housing isn't primarily shelter anymore. It's a financial instrument class, and it's excessively profitable to permit ordinary people ownership. Remember Maslow's hierarchy from psychology: food, water, shelter forming the foundation. Absolute survival necessities. Corporate operators recognize they're monopolizing one of those fundamental requirements, which means demand exhibits complete inelasticity. Tenants cannot simply choose not to rent. They cannot boycott or postpone indefinitely. They require roofs over their heads, and they'll pay whatever algorithms determine the market will bear. That's why institutional capital views California housing as the ultimate wealth extraction vehicle. This transformation fundamentally revolutionizes everything. When your landlord is an individual human, space exists for negotiation, for understanding circumstances, for flexibility during hardship. When your landlord is an algorithm maximizing quarterly returns for distant shareholders, you're merely a revenue data point. Rent increases because predictive models indicate market tolerance. Maintenance gets systematically delayed because it reduces profit margins. Eviction processes accelerate because no human relationship creates procedural friction. Don't even think about leaving, because what I'm about to reveal next shows you the Proposition 13 reform that could force millions of California homeowners to liquidate immediately. The small landlord exodus isn't generating opportunities for everyday buyers. It's manufacturing a feeding frenzy for institutional capital deployment. And once these corporations control sufficient California housing inventory, they don't just control shelter. They control enormous portions of household disposable income, consumer economic behavior, and regional financial stability. That power concentration should terrify every single Californian, whether you rent or own. But the final force reshaping California property might detonate the most explosive consequences of all. California collected over $4.8 billion from property transfer taxes last year, and that's despite transaction volumes collapsing significantly. Tax revenue extracted from real estate is absolutely enormous, and Sacramento recognizes this precisely. But behind closed legislative doors, policy architects and political advisors are championing something far more revolutionary: a comprehensive proposition. 13 reform that would fundamentally restructure California property taxation for the first time in decades. Circulating proposals suggest implementing progressive property tax rates specifically targeting homes valued above $800,000. If that sounds like it exclusively impacts wealthy coastal elites, reconsider immediately. Throughout Bay Area suburbs, you'll discover modest 3-bedroom homes assessed at $800,000. Across Southern California, ordinary family properties substantially exceed that threshold. This isn't about taxing billionaire estates and celebrity compounds. This is about extracting dramatically increased revenue from middle-class homeowners who watched valuations explode, not because they're wealthy, but because California's housing market became completely detached from economic reality. The political calculation is transparent. Property wealth concentrates heavily among older California voters who purchased decades ago. Younger voters systematically excluded from ownership demonstrate strong support for taxing accumulated property wealth. It's politically seductive revenue generation, without directly raising income or sales taxes. But consequences could prove absolutely catastrophic. Homeowners above the new threshold would face annual tax bills potentially worth tens of thousands of dollars annually. Many would face forced liquidation. Others would witness retirement security completely disintegrate. California's property market, already experiencing severe stress, could face sudden systematic collapse. Nobody knows precisely what form Proposition 13 reform will ultimately take, or when implementation occurs. But the directional trajectory is unmistakably clear. Sacramento desperately needs revenue, and property represents one of the few remaining areas with massive untapped taxable wealth. Transfer taxes already extracted $4.8 billion during a dramatically suppressed market. Imagine what comprehensive property tax restructuring could generate annually. The catastrophic danger is triggering an accelerating downward spiral. Forced. Liquidations flood inventory. Valuations crater. Additional homeowners find themselves underwater on mortgages. More panic selling follows. It's a self-reinforcing collapse cycle that becomes impossible to arrest once momentum builds. Here's the brutal reality of where California actually stands. Mortgages have become easier to qualify for, which superficially sounds positive until you recognize it risks reinflating another speculative bubble. Inventory is exploding upward, but primarily because financial desperation is forcing liquidations, not because the market is experiencing healthy correction. Individual landlords are abandoning California, while corporate predators circle aggressively, positioned to acquire everything they're forced to surrender. And tax reform proposals are being engineered that could devastate the entire market for anyone owning property valued above $800,000. These 5 forces aren't isolated independent issues. They're deeply interconnected, amplifying each other, manufacturing a system that increasingly appears deliberately engineered against ordinary Californians. Loosened lending artificially props up valuations, enabling desperate sellers to exit without triggering market collapse. The landlord exodus creates acquisition opportunities for institutional consolidation. Pending tax reforms could trigger massive additional forced sales, delivering corporations even more discounted inventory opportunities. Every single force points identically in one direction. California housing is being systematically transformed from something middle-class families own into something they perpetually rent from faceless corporate monopolies. California's property marketplace hasn't merely shifted during 2025, it's undergone complete structural transformation. The question isn't whether you personally approve of these changes. The question is whether you comprehend them sufficiently well to make intelligent protective decisions for your specific situation. Do these forces ultimately stabilize California's market? Or are we accelerating towards something completely unrecognizable and potentially catastrophic? Drop your perspective in the comments section. I genuinely read virtually every single response and continuously learn from your diverse viewpoints. If you found this investigation valuable, subscribe immediately and activate notifications so you never miss subsequent revelations. More critically, share this analysis with someone who needs to comprehend what's genuinely occurring. The more Californians who penetrate through manufactured narratives, the more pressure we can collectively apply demanding policymakers actually solve systemic problems instead of merely protecting institutional interests. Smash that like button if this breakdown exposed realities about California real estate you weren't previously aware of. Comment below with "Stop Corporate Takeover" if you're prepared to demand officials prioritize ordinary Californians over institutional profits. Share this video with minimum 3 people who own or rent in California, because they deserve access to truth. What unfolds next impacts every single one of us, whether we currently own, rent, or we're still desperately attempting to achieve that initial foothold. Accurate knowledge provides power.